Welcome to the UNBC Forestry Club Podcast. This podcast is recorded at the Seaford radio station on campus from the traditional unceded territory of Clayton Tenay. You're probably listening from other places in BC or Canada or maybe around the world. We encourage you to recognize the traditional territory you get to learn, play, and live on. All right, welcome back, smart people. So today we have a really special episode prepared for you because UNBC Forestry Club Podcast is out and about. Today we're in the beautiful Victoria into the office of Chief Forester. And sitting across me is the Deputy Chief Forester, Norah White. And Norah is a registered professional forester of the province. And today she's going to join us and talk about how forestry students can even get into working for the government, some old growth management strategies, and this hot button topic, FLP. And so I just really want to thank Norah for joining us and welcome to the podcast. I appreciate this.
Thank you. I am so grateful to you for traveling to me, making it so easy to do this.
This is my first time in Victoria. It's just gorgeous place, beautiful, and we were chatting there earlier that if there's one place I can live in a city, I'm not a city person, but Victoria will be it. Like the view across this office, whatever that building is, it's just beautiful.
I know, you need to get some shots of that.
Yeah.
Walk around.
Anyway, and for all the guests to come up, we always want to learn a little bit about you. And for many people, I think even for students in forestry, that we're always just wondering, what is this office of Chief Forester and what do you do? And then how do you even become the Deputy Chief Forester? And basically just, how do you get here and how do you become the Deputy Chief Forester? And what do you do?
Yeah, great questions. Excellent questions. I just want to take us back briefly to literally where we are today. So in Victoria, BC, but where we are is on the territories of the Lekwungen speaking peoples. And I just learned yesterday, I probably knew this before, but I was reminded there's actually 32 language families of First Nations in BC, each with their own amazingly distinct culture and history and language, frankly. So this is one of the 32 different language areas, and the nations that we have here in Victoria who've been on the land since time immemorial are the Esquimalt and the Songhees nations.
Cool.
Yeah, and I've had the privilege of meeting with the Songhees several times in the last couple of years, actually, as they've welcomed us to their territories and various meetings that we've held, and just they're a very welcoming nation. They love to share sort of the stories of what used to be on this place. They'll describe. The elder that we talked to described how they were the very first mobile homes. They used to kind of create like their cedar plank homes and move them about the territory. So she laughs when she describes that. But yeah, so that's where we are today. I just wanted to acknowledge that it's a beautiful spot. And so, yeah, good to be gorgeous. Here. So our office here, we're kind of in an amazing spot here in the provincial government. We're right behind the legislature, which is a cool place to be. And that's part of answering what I do, because I do spend time trotting back and forth across the street over to the legislature and back over to Victoria, or my office is here, because our minister sits over there.
Nice.
Our brand new minister. And yeah, so the House is in session right now. Which means that all the MLAs are here and actively working in the BC legislature.
Oh,
and
cool.
So our minister draws heavily on us, and that's a big part of my role. But just kind of what is the Chief Forester's office and what is a Deputy Chief Forester?
Exactly.
Yeah, like who are we? So today's Chief Forester is Shane Berg, RPF, and he's the 18th Chief Forester of the province. So we've got a long history of this in the province. And really, the simplest way to kind of describe really what they do is they're kind of the champions of forest management for BC. They've got one very major decision in the law, which is determining the allowable annual cut.
The AAC.
Right. And so there's a tenure process that the chief forester has to move around the province and kind of look closely into each of the management units, the timber supply areas and the tree farm licenses. That's their jurisdiction.
Right.
And they take a really good look at those areas and say, what's happening? How are they being logged? How are they being managed? What are the current practices? And therefore, what can this area sustain in the future over the next 10 years? And so that's the process of establishing an AAC. Because we have, I think it's 70 something, almost 80 management units in the province right now, that's a big job. That's a lot of determinations. So that's where the deputies come in. So there's myself, and then there's actually another deputy chief forester, Albert Nussbaum. So the two of us are deputies to Shane.
Cool.
And it's our job to support him in his statutory decision making as he goes around and does that. There's also another statutory decision that we're going to talk about a little bit later, I guess, probably around FLP.
Yeah.
And that's a new decision of the chief forester. And so when you look into the law, you'll see that just a few years ago, the legislature passed the law bringing forth FLP and saying the chief forester can create these plans and must establish them.
Good
So
to
that's
know.
a whole other bucket of work.
Work on you probably too. Hey?
Yeah. So for the three of us, those are kind of our official roles. But it's a really fun job. Like, I feel like it's the kind of job where I have the reason to be anywhere in the province at any given time, helping on anything that needs help, honestly.
Right.
Yeah.
So how do you become deputy chief forester? And then maybe briefly, if you want me to bring me back to education, and then maybe your career path, and kind of inspiring students in school, and then maybe you can follow your footsteps, and then maybe one day become deputy chief forester as well, maybe potentially.
I think everyone has their own path to it. It's quite interesting. Like, I think it's a position of leadership. So, it really depends what we need at that time. So Albert's path, for example, and I'll talk about mine. Albert is incredibly knowledgeable, came up through the inventory group and decision-making support in the Ministry of Forests. So just knows that process of AAC determinations inside and out.
Right.
For me, my path was more, I was very interested in forest policy from the beginning. So I remember in the early 2000s, I was a summer student on the north end of Vancouver Island for Western Forest Products. I just remember clambering up a hillside in Salel like I have never seen before and going, why am I here?
I'm quitting.
Right. Well, not quite the I'm quitting, but more, yes, probably a little bit in that moment. But also, like, why? Why are we logging here? Why does this matter? Like, what is the greater purpose of this block? Like, what is it contributing to? What's the management scheme? How is this benefiting the province? All these questions are floating through my head as I was kind of trying to draw this straight line up a hill.
Right.
And so those questions really, I think, propelled me to kind of step back and go, where can I answer those? And it wasn't necessarily work in the woods. So my next step actually was to come to Victoria. I was fortunate enough to be accepted into what is called the BC Legislative Internship Program. And they accept 10 graduates at the legislature every year in January. And I was graduating at the time, I think it was 2004. And so there wasn't a lot of jobs in forestry that year. The best I could have got was a crewman, and I didn't get it. So I was like, okay, this is a great opportunity to go learn something a little bit different. So off I went to become a legislative intern, and I got this amazing picture of how the province runs. I worked in a constituency office. I went up to the North Island. I helped start what was some work around a new college of forestry. And then I got the chance to go and work with the opposition caucus. So at the time it was Carol James in the group, and helped them do their research for the House. And it just gave me this amazing perspective. And then it was time to go and actually learn how to do forestry.
Yeah.
So I had to leave that behind, and I dove right into the ministry and started working there.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Maybe this is a question of how do you work for doing the policy side of things, but also become RPF, like the articling process?
Yeah, exactly. So that So after I had done a whole bunch of work and I'd done the political policy side of experience, I thought, like, I got to go do my articling. I want to go back into forestry. So I was really lucky. In 2004, picture the internet in 2004.
Internet.
Yeah.
Not great.
Not great. You got it. That's exactly what was happening. So I plugged in my internet and I don't even remember what the search engine was at the time. It was not Google. And I just said, I really like the stewardship side of forestry is my passion. I'm very interested in like the people, the communities, the benefits, like how we plan for things, what values are we managing. So I Googled or whatever I searched up whoever I could, and I found a name and I cold called. And that was the beginning of everything for me. The person I cold called turned out to be a senior like policy officer in forest planning for the Ministry of Forests at the time. They took me in. They said, "Yep, come and work with us as an intern." I spent a couple of months with them. They became my sponsoring forester.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so our relationship deepened, and over the next few years, they helped me draft up my learning plan. I got as much diversity of experience as I could. Lots of getting out and traveling, lots of exposure to all of the different policy areas here in Victoria. Yeah, it was amazing.
That's fascinating. And always students will always get this talk, and for working for the government, it's better to have a master's degree. Do you think from your experience, is master's degree like really matters? Because that's 2 extra years of commitments in school. Maybe it's probably different for different branches in the government, but maybe for the policy side of things, do you think master would be it?
I think it completely depends what you're interested in, but
Right.
nothing substitutes for work experience.
That's true.
Work experience is amazing, and especially right now, there's no degree that can capture the changes that are happening right now in the sector and really prepare you better than being in it.
Right.
At the moment, I think it's a very exciting time to be in forestry.
It is. And then we're thinking about, I think what's the hardest job on this earth is probably working for the government. What's harder is probably working in the forestry sector, because forestry as a form of land use management, and we're 95% of the BC forest is owned by the Crown or by the people.
Yeah.
And we're always just joking about like government is steering this big boat of BC forestry, and everybody on this boat want this boat to go to different directions. And it's hard to come to a decision that make everybody happy. Maybe everybody's gonna upset a little bit. You have the trade-off, check balance and trade-off. So it's a difficult job. And so today I'm trying to dip the toe into some of the important values that the people care about. And one of them is definitely the old growth. It's a very hot button topic. People been talking about it for a couple of years now. And from my understanding, you were working around this realm of old growth for a little bit. Maybe just tell me a little bit about this old growth, and then maybe some of the challenges and opportunities that the Crown is facing.
Oh my gosh. Thank you for asking that. If there's one thing that I think I've learned over my last couple of years of working in that file, it's just that it is probably the most passionate and emotion-based topip in all of forestry.
Yeah.
It is just quite amazing to work near that degree of passion and a privilege, actually, because people really bear themselves on that topic. It means a lot to them. So old growth is it's central to BC, right? It's part of how I even came into forestry. I was in grade 5, and I think I took a school bus tour in a cut block for old growth being harvested up in Was on the North Island. It's an early memory I have of seeing that and being like, this is intriguing. The next year were the Clayoquot protests.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and my mom and my family and we were up in Tofino, and again, I have an early memory of her driving us past the protesters and talking a bit about what was going on there. So it's deep in our history, this topic area. And so in the last couple years, actually, I was asked to come in and lead the province's response to that old growth strategic review that was done in 2020, which I saw as a huge privilege because, and I would encourage everyone to take a look at that report. It's dense, but it is one of the best written, best kind of looks at the state of BC forest management right now. It is, I tell everyone, it's not about old growth. That report is not about old growth. It's about like how we change our management system to really respect the fact that we have to root it in ecology, we have to root it in biodiversity, and we have to root it in the health of the resource, nothing else, or there can be no industry. And the importance of the resilience for communities and economies at the same time from that. So that's really what that report's about. And so I had the privilege of helping to put together the government's action plan on that, which was launched a year ago. I'm sure your listeners will have heard and seen a lot of the conversations that happened around what we were calling the deferred areas. That was one of the first actions the government took. It was a really bold action. And I think government, everyone involved in that bold step, I think learned a lot from it. In particular, I think it really highlights just, again, the importance of these areas and what they mean to so many people, not the least of which are First Nations. And the deferrals that we did was a process of kind of looking across the land base and saying, where are some of these vestiges that really, really have high value right now that we need to just pause, and then we can decide what to do next with. But for now, make sure nothing happens just in case. It's a bit of a preventative approach in that respect.
Right.
And which was one of the direct requests of the Old Growth Strategic Review. So we did that work, and that was tough work. Right? That had huge impacts for people, and it continues to today because those areas, many of which are still in discussions. They're not back on the logging land base. They're not protected yet. They're still deferred until we can move through planning processes with nations to determine what the better long-term future is for those areas.
Right, those tap polygon.
That's right.
That's what people be thinking about. Actually, I was working in the bush at that time when the old growth deferral first came out.
Yeah.
From my experience, there's a lot of confusion when it first came out. Like any policy when it first came out, there are uncertainties, and I remember I was in a tap polygon, but I was drilling all the trees trying to figure out the age of those, and none of them was under the old growth definition. So we're like, okay, what do we even do with this polygon? And so there was a lot of confusion at that time, and but it's old growth, and people in the province, we definitely care a lot about old growth, and there's tons of reasons for that. I don't even have time to even get into today. But maybe just some of those deferral, from my understanding, got mixed feedback, and some nations kind of, let's do this, and some nations like, I'm not a huge fan. And maybe just what's our provincial strategy for the old growth forest management right now, and then those kind of handling the differences in response from nations.
Yeah, I mean, that's a huge question.
It is.
And so I think our strategy right now is still information. There's parts of it that are clearer than others. We've got the action plan out there, and the government has said, we're still very fresh in a new government, but our minister has indicated, and the government's indicated, this is something we're continuing to commit to. And so that falls to me and my team to how do we make that a reality? Right. So, policies like our biodiversity guidebook, right? And what it sets out, our land use planning guidebook and what it sets out, they're decades old and created without input of nations, which is not how we do things today. And the deferrals, like you pointed out, the tap areas were very controversial, I think, for that reason. That was government and nations kind of saying, no, there's a new way that we're going to work together. You're not going to tell us. This is something that we're going to do together. And those questions that you raised, if we're finding old growth that's above or below the current forestry definition, what do we do with this? How do we value it? What's our process for it? And And I think, the province's approach right now is to say we have to come to the table with nations on a local basis. We're doing that through FLP. We're doing that through other processes. It's not just FLP. I think right now, I think I saw a number recently. There's more than 50 processes of planning underway across the province today.
50?
Yeah.
50?
50.
Oh, wow.
It's
I didn't know that.
extraordinary. Yeah, and that's modernized land use planning, other informal tables that have started between government and nations. And, I think from the province's perspective, at least from mine, I would hope that, this starts to move us into a place where everyone can kind of see and know what to expect next, have some certainty about what planning will get us to. Right. And what it looks like to go through those processes. Because they're all a little bit different right now.
Everybody's different. And there's a famous quote in forestry is forestry is not rocket science.
Love it.
It's more difficult than that.
Yeah.
I think it's from Dr. Phil, what's his name? Phil Burnell?
Oh, Fred Burnell.
Fred Burnell.
Yes, it could be.
Yeah, that's
iconic UBC professor.
Yeah, exactly. I heard him from Dr. Roy this morning. Oh my goodness, my lip. But yeah, he pretty much introduced that quote to us, and I think made total sense.
It does. And you know what? There's another quote I love. It was by Dr. John Worrell, and I didn't have him as a professor. He was really iconic at UBC as well, a dendrology professor. But he just said, if someone asks you to go manage the forest, just go have a coffee. He's like, until they tell you what they want to see.
Yeah.
That's our job, to help to figure out what's that end goal? What are we trying to reach? And then we can start to bring the skill set to bear on getting there.
Totally.
So old growth is no exception.
Old growth, it's a huge one.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned FLP, the Forest Landscape Plan, and I do want to spend some time talk about this. And from my understanding, from my time at UNBC, from all the classes we took, FLP is just a thing. People keep bringing it up. From our planning course, from our First Nation course, and I was working in the industry, and people brought that up as well. And so maybe just for those people who don't even know what FLP is, and maybe can you just touch on what the FLP is and why is that so special in our province? What kind of role is FLP playing in our future forestry?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Okay, the first thing I have to say is I'm super excited about FLP. When I was telling you about my sponsoring forester, one of the tasks he gave me 20 years ago was right as the code was leaving, FERPA was coming in. He said, please do an assessment of the first FSPs in the province.
What's FSP?
Forest Stewardship Plan.
Oh,
right?
Oh, FS. Oh, FSP. Yeah, I know FSP.
Yeah. He said, have a look at these and tell me what you think. So I did a whole evaluation of these things and said, okay, this is going to be interesting. I don't know how this is going to go. We might have some challenges, particularly around the fact that they're written by the forest industry. Yeah. Which was a decision at the time, right? Government said that's what we want. But in forestry, as we know in BC, it's so complex, and everybody wants to be part of the decision making in the process. And that was a big part of the challenges that we thought, oh boy, how's this going to go? So fast forward 15 years, it came to bear. We had letters, forums, stakeholder groups started to sort of reach out to us over kind of the 2006 to 2016, 17 era, saying, we just don't know what's happening on the ground. Like, we walk out and there's a road or there's a cut block and we had no idea. We don't know where the industry is going. And it was really challenging. The other thing that was challenging was that, industry would come to us and say, we're really struggling to find where the AAC is. We can't really spatialize it. That was another big part of it. And now also remember that this is before the Declaration Act on the Rights of Indigenous People in BC. We didn't have DRIPA until 2019. So this is all building up to DRIPA, and a big question mark was, how are nations involved in planning? Like, consultation, the way that it's done, is rooted in kind of the Constitution and court precedents, but that's not really a solution, right, to actually working collaboratively. So what is? And so all of these questions were swirling in our minds, and I had the privilege of getting to work on the solution to that and then writing the law around what FLP is. So FLP, to get right to your question, is our new planning regime in the province that is designed, it's forest landscape planning is what it's called. And it's designed to ultimately come in and be the new FSP. So it is a different looking beast entirely. It is no longer written by the forest industry or by a licensee proponent. It's actually written officially by the chief forester. But the chief forester says, you know what, this is a regional thing. It's regions, it's local communities, it's the local industry, it's the local stakeholders, and it's the nations who know what needs to happen on this land base and who will drive that planning process. And so we've got 4 pilots that have been running now for several years around the province. We've got 2 on the coast and 2 in the interior. And they were launched to help us learn what FLP could be. So we took a chance, and even before we even had the law for FLP, we said, we're gonna start these. We found willing partners in 4 different areas of the province to say, yeah, we'll do that with you. We don't know where we're gonna land, but we're gonna try it. And we're just coming to the end of that right now. So it's a pretty different kind of planning process. I'd encourage anyone to kind of get on the government website. There's amazing resources there that sort of describe the details of the steps.
Right.
But you can see those now, right? We've designed that with the help of these pilots over the last few years, and we understand much more clearly how we can manage more values, how we bring in First Nations to the table. They are at the table. It is a G to G process when we do these now.
G to G.
Totally different
Government
than before.
to government.
Yeah.
This is perfect. What's that law that you were talking about? What law did you write? What's that thing?
DRIPA?
Oh, you wrote DRIPA?
No. I did not write DRIPA.
I was like, whoa. So what was that law that kind of for FLP?
There was it's an amendment to the Forest and Range Practices Act.
Oh, I see.
That came through. Yeah, it doesn't have an exciting name. It's called the Forest and Range Statutes Amendment Act 2021, Bill 23, if anyone wants to look it up. But yeah.
I would definitely. One thing before I went back to UNBC, I worked in the industry for 4 years, and then I was really into like the biology side of things, knowing different flowers and plants and knowing the waters, the landscape, everything. Every time people talk about legislation, I'm just not my thing, boring. I don't like that. I don't. But it's important because we're a highly regulated profession, and ever since I come back to UNBC, and then there are a lot of courses they offered at UNBC kind of guide you into different components of this FERPA back to the Forest Practice Code, and then kind of force you to learn it. Initially, I'm like, I want to be back in the bush, but started looking into it. It's getting really interesting and learn the history of how this legislation in the province kind of, evolved into our current state. And it's just, I sound super nerdy by saying this, but sometimes on days off, I read FERPA for fun. I would read through them, and I would go through some of the regulation, go to the Forest Plan and Practice regulation and look into those, and okay, this is why we do that kind of stream classification. That's why we do that, and then this is because there's a regulation on this that we have to follow. And
it's a really important part of how we do things in BC. We have a really interesting kind of ribbon of history around why. This is a complex, passionate place to do forestry, right? So our laws are constantly trying to adapt to that. And we've seen these eras, like you pointed out. There was this era of, there's all the pre-sustainable forest management history stuff, but then you get into the Forest Practices Code where we said, wait a second, we really need to manage these values clearly and prescriptively, so to speak. And then we kind of went, no, that's not the right way. And then there was a little brief era where we adjusted the Forest Practices Code and made it a little bit more workable. And then we went right to FERPA, which was the other kind of side of the spectrum, which was like, let's try something completely different. Let's put the work on industry and the forest professional to really do the bulk of it. And we've kind of come back the other way. And we have these ebbs and flows of forest policy and how we're trying to find that sweet spot, I think, that really captures and responds to public sentiment and what it is ultimately we're trying to get out of the forest, right?
Yeah.
So.
And I have a message for people. I think a lot of students are when you talk about laws or legislation, they just roll their eyes. Oh, here we go. But it really is important and really is interesting. And I highly recommend just be patient a little bit, read through them. They're quite interesting, and you can see this evolutions of our planning or legislation process in the province.
And I will say too, if anyone is looking to become a professional forester, you're going to need to know those laws.
Or you go to forestry jail.
Yeah, well.
Get locked up. That would be a shame. Is that a thing? Do you know? Is that forestry jail a thing?
No. No, maybe there's some fees and fines.
Yeah, the Forest Practice Board, and they do their thing.
That is true. It's not a good place to be.
Yeah, no, don't go there. I do want to find a forestry lawyer. I don't know if that's an actual thing to.
There's a few. Well, I mean, Jason Fisher is one, right?
Shout out to Jason Fisher. Jason,
yeah.
Thank you.
Shout out to Jason. I've been fortunate to work with two in particular in my career, and they've taught me so much about what I know about the policy and really respect for it and why it's there. And one of them is Trevor Swan. I'll shout out to Trevor Swan, who's a forester. Well, I think he may be retired status now, but no, he's retired lawyer status, but Trevor's one. And the other one is Richard Grieve. So two longstanding public servants who are both lawyers and foresters, and just amazing depth of knowledge on all of our laws and policies and why they're there.
Yeah, and one of the reasons I'm interested in those is because in forestry, this is just me thinking about right now. Forestry it's a balancing act. Yeah. There are a lot of times you have to make decisions. It's kind of acting as a judge, and then you have all those. FLP have 12 values now. Right? 12 or 11?
Yes, you're right.
12.
Thank you. Most people say 11, and I have to go, no, it's 12.
12, because I was looking into that. Forest fire was added in there.
Exactly.
It was a new one. 12 values. And then I'm thinking about, you have to balance between 12 values. You have 12 parties sitting under you. Think about a forester as a judge, right? In that kind of thing. And you have 12 parties trying to advocate for their clients. And then you, as a judge, you have to come up with a judgment that's you have to be justified and then fair for everybody. You know what I mean? Like even for plaintiff and defendant, that's hard enough. Now you have 12. So sometimes
you're really looking to it's not about winning or losing on the values either, right? It's about, this is where, forestry is so fascinating because it is this art and this science together. There's judgment involved in looking across that suite, and you're drawing upon your experiences, wherever you've come from in your experiences, right, related to forestry and the skills that you've gathered, and going there are these 12 things that the public of BC has said matter, and they've said it through law. They've said it matters so much, we're writing them into FLP. But they're not the only things. No. Right? There's more. And the more that we learn to work with nations and the more that their values come to the table, it changes that suite of considerations again. And really what you're looking for, it's that question that Dr. Worrell posed so long ago. He's like, go have a coffee until someone tells you what they want that forest to look like, what they're looking to have come from that forest, that forested land base. Go have a coffee. Right? And so it's about really kind of taking that whole suite of considerations and the 12 that are in the law, but more than that. And really being tapped into, what is the public sentiment and whose sentiment matters for that area of forest, right? Sitting here as one of the two deputy chief foresters, we're faced with that every day. And the FLP establishment decision, the AAC determination decision in law, ask us to consider local values, and we have a lot of people to rely on for that. We don't do it ourselves, of course. Huge teams take years to gather that information and present it and synthesize it. But we have to look at that, and we also look at the provincial value and the provincial interest at the same time as it's stated in FLP with the 12 values. So,
right.
Yeah.
Since we're here, I'm gonna politely put you on a spot. Can you hook me up with your team doing FLPs, and then maybe we'll do some case study with them when the time is appropriate.
Yeah, yeah. I think you're asking at exactly the right time. I'm fingers are crossed that this is the year that we'll see some of the first FLPs established in the province. We've had, like we mentioned, the 4 pilots. They've been working hard for several years now. 3 years, 4 years, even in some cases, and they're coming to the end of it. And we're hoping that those come in and they become established really soon. So as soon as those come through, they're going to be available to read. You'll be able to kind of understand and go back and say, like, what did we learn from this process? We're going to be doing that too, frankly.
Right.
As a big part of why we had pilots.
Right.
Right. Is like, how did this look different from an FSP? Did this work? Like, what should we be changing?
I can't be more excited to see those. I do everything to I had to see those firsthand, whatever, come back. And I'll be graduating in April, and
Excellent.
then I don't know where I'm going to be working, but I would love to come back and then explore the findings, and then, because this is arguably the most important topic, because we're talking about the planning framework. It's a mechanism to have people sit down and then, discuss where at that region or that landscape, how people want to manage their forest.
Absolutely.
And we, before I came here, I set up a little whiteboard at UNBC. I kind of let the forestry students and more students, even faculties on campus, to throw some questions on here, because sometimes I just don't know enough to even ask questions. So, and there are a couple of questions here. I'm just gonna throw your way. I'm just gonna read them like word for word, and probably start from. So we have an election in the fall. So the question is, how do you see the election in the fall impacting BC forestry? ? End quote.
Yep. Well, I think, I can speak from where I sit here, and it's really interesting because when you're a public servant during an election, there's this run-up period where, I don't know if this is probably getting nerdy and geeky, but there's a lot of procedures that the government has to follow through. And so for us in the public service, there's a kind of a period before an election where it's really important that we're not asking questions that are going to bind a new government or doing things that are going to bind a new government. So it causes us to kind of pull back a little bit and kind of work on stuff inside the system as opposed to engaging outside. So we can go a little bit quiet in terms of our work as public servants. Then comes this period of what's called interregnum. Have you ever heard that?
No.
Yeah. It's called between reigns. It's like an old term, like between reigns of the crown. So as the crown is being passed from one head to another, interregnum, there is no government at that point in time. So a public service has no direction.
Right.
And so we need to sit and do our own work in-house until such time as a new minister is sworn in, and we can start to work with them and engage with them. And again, the direction starts to flow. We really are a creature of our government system. So that's kind of the official side of things. The other thing that's just really cool is that we've got fun programs and good people around here. So we get to keep doing some pretty cool stuff. So, during interregnum this year, I got the chance to go out. I was pretty new in the role I'm in now. I've been in it for 8 or 9 months. But in September, we got to go out and take a look at the fires in Kelowna. And just walk the ground, look at and talk about some of the challenges to reforestation in that area, some of the new things they're going to try, different stock type, for example. I've had some good discussions about that. Just the microsite conditions they're going to face, all kinds of discussions. We were out there for a couple of days doing that. So that's the kind of work that we'll turn and focus on during an election. But for me, especially with the old growth piece, I was thinking, oh gosh, is a new government going to come in and say, yeah, that doesn't matter to us anymore? Because they can. That's their prerogative.
Right.
And we didn't see that happen, as we've already kind of covered. But we have seen a new government come in, and if you guys haven't had a chance to look at the mandate letters of the ministers, that's an important way of knowing where they're going to head for the next few years, what they're trying to achieve. And so We have our minister's mandate letter. It talks about the BC timber sales review. It does continue to talk about the importance of forest ecosystems and the protection of those and the management of those. So that gives me a good mandate to keep doing my work. Caution on those mandate letters, though, they're not everything. So you're never going to see a mandate letter that says keep doing silviculture, keep planting trees.
Right.
You're just not going to see something like that nature. That's core business. You're going to see there's some new directions we'd like to take you. Here they are. So
the new minister of forest, he's a really cool. He's like he will literally like vlog type and then like update himself on social media on Facebook and Instagram. And I saw this. I want to follow him, and then he had a big tour up north.
he did.
Like all the way up to I forgot where, but like west of Prince George, and then down here, and then like posting all the updates and stuff. And I saw him went to UBC, and I'm like, no, come to UNBC too.
Oh, you just need to invite him.
Yeah, so I left a message. I said, hey, can you come to UNBC as well? He's like, oh, of course. He replied. He's like, of course. So next time, well, things can change, right? And I 100% understand, but we have this little rough agreement that he's going to visit us when the next time he's in town in Prince George.
He is a busy guy.
Oh yeah.
As I understand this is just my own kind of rumor that I've been hearing, but he came into the job, and it's the role of the deputy minister to get him acquainted and understand the portfolio, make sure he has all the information he needs, gets to meet all the people he needs, help him get into the role.
Right.
And so our deputy minister kind of said, well, minister, you can, we've got 8 weeks of briefings set up for you, or you can hit the road. And he said, hit the road.
Hit the road.
So that's what he did.
Yeah.
He's been super active.
I like his speech. I was at the Natural Resource Forum, and then and I liked his speech. And
oh, good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't get to attend that.
But you were at FPBC?
FPBC.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was there. I actually got to chair the planning committee this year. It was really fun. Yeah, so anyone who's listening who becomes a registered forest professional, you can volunteer to do that role. That's what happened for me. And I spent, it was about 10 months of meeting with a really cool group of people.
Oh, wow, that's a longer than I thought it would be.
Oh, yeah. 10 months. We, heavy lifting in the beginning when you're trying to think of like, what's salient? What do we need to talk about? What's going to be happening in February that forest professionals are going to care about? You know, what are they going to need to have sessions on? And so, we worked on that for about 10 months and then pulled it all together, but it was a blast.
I really wanted to go. When they were Prince George, I went, but like, it's just too far.
Understood.
And it happened on because it happened last week, right? 2 weeks ago. Was it last week?
2 weeks ago.
2 weeks ago. And that was when all the midterms and everything was due at the same week. All the professors decided to, well, I'm going to make everything due the week before the reading break. Mm-hmm. So I'm like, okay, well, I guess I'm not going. Also, it's expensive.
Lots of time. But there's also the online version, right? So it is 2 ways. This year we had 500 people in the room and 1,600 online.
Crazy.
Yeah, it was fantastic. That's like half the membership.
I didn't know you can do online.
Yeah, and it doesn't cost as much.
All right, I'm just gonna keep going through the question list from forestry students and faculties and other students at UNBC, what they care about, and then. Again, I'm just going to read the questions, and then this question is about, with the slowing down of available timber, how are we going to adjust the forest sector to combat that? Question mark, end quote. Did I say star quote? No, I never did.
Yeah.
Anyway,
yeah,
another huge question for you.
They're great questions. I mean, exciting time in forestry. Always is. We have so many forces that are changing our forests right now, and the supply of not just timber, but the supply of all of the values that we are demanding out of the forest right now as people, a lot of forces changing the supply. Yesterday I was at a meeting, it was an international group who work on sustainable forest management and the Montreal Process Criteria and Indicators framework. Like, what are all the things that we do to make sure that we're doing good sustainable forest management?
Right.
And I was telling them about the impacts of climate change on BC's forests, the wildfire implications, the drought implications, the pathogen and insect implications. And these are all forces that have dramatically changed the available timber supply, of course. As we start to work differently in forestry, like through our FLP processes, as we bring in different values and listen to different values than we have in previous decades, those also change what's wanted out of the forest and the economic fiber supply of the province as well. My co-deputy chief forester, Albert, has a great visual that he shows of the province of BC. I don't have it with me today, but it's you can picture it fairly easily. It's a map of BC. There's 2/3 of it essentially that is forested, right? And only about 1/3 of that is even kind of available or economic to harvest because of it's got huge haul distances on it. It was this, a catastrophic fire occurred, like Donnie Creek would be part of that. Or even right now, or the TAP deferrals, like we talked about, the deferred areas are part of that pressure in changing our fiber supply right now. So it's not a simple solution. It's inordinately complex. And we have all kinds of new international instability around this as well. So I think, when it comes to adjusting, the forest sector, it's not all on the forest sector. Government has a huge role in that. Industry has a huge role in that, and nations will have a big role in that, where they see themselves as players in bringing forward different sources of fiber supply. But I can say that all parties right now, I think, have a really good understanding that yes, we expect things like the allowable annual cut to decline. Mm-hmm. It's going to decline. We know that. We've been through mountain pine beetle. We can all see the graphs. We know there's a midterm. And there's other forces, not just mountain pine beetle, but I think there's a very strong understanding that is the case out there. But the important thing to do now is to just get a stable flow, right? Being able to understand where that fiber can come from, what it will look like, over what time frame is what really matters now. So a lot of people have to work together on that.
Yeah, fortunately, there's not simple questions. And
no.
That's one thing I learned starting doing this podcast is these questions, because people are really passionate about these things, right? But these questions normally frame as really big questions, and then with the multiple layers and complexity, it's important to you have to really peel them to the really core roots, and then I don't know how to say this right, but it's big questions gonna have big answer, or like not very specific answer, because it's a big topic to discuss, right? And then
so one thing about forestry that maybe students would be interested in is start to learn a little bit about complexity theory. You'd never think this was a thing about forestry. But I remember a leadership course I took once, and it talked about something called the Cynefin framework. Cynefin. And you spell that oddly. It's a Gaelic word, Cynefin. Cynefin. And what it is it's a way of looking at the circumstance that you're in and figuring a way through it. So there are simple circumstances, complicated circumstances, chaotic circumstances, and complex circumstances. They're all different.
Right. And
they require different kinds of courses of action. We're in a complex circumstance. Sometimes borders a little chaotic.
It could
Depending where you are and what's going on, it could. But ultimately, it's complex. No model can predict where we're going. No one can do that. So it's about getting the right people at the table and working through it for regional solutions, and constantly saying what's changing and how do we adapt.
That's the fun part of forestry, though. Is what makes it unique and interesting, and why I and many forestry students love this field is just because it's hard. It requires people, and more people. I was talking to some of my friends that we need more people out of high school. They want to, instead of being other occupation, try forestry. And then even into biology side of things, we do so much about biodiversity in forestry that even myself, speaking from my own experience, just doing layout for 4 years, that you have to identify the stick nests, the bear dens, habitat for fishers, and a lot of legal, they call it constraints, but I kind of don't like that word.
That's right. We're changing that.
Oh, yeah. Are you?
Well, I just think that's the paradigm that's changing, right?
Right.
Like not officially changing that, but that's exactly what you just said, and that's really insightful to me, actually, that's kind of how you see it too, because my era of forestry and everyone I've learned from calls it constraints, right? But that's a different way of looking at things. That's if you're just looking at one type of value, what's a constraint on that value? But when you're looking at an overall outcome on a land base, you're looking to bring a certain kind of fiber off of it, not just timber, but fiber. And you're looking for other values. It's not constraints anymore. No. The language changes, and that's really important. And it's interesting to hear you say that.
And then even like the First Nation could be considered as a constraint as well, which I think everybody in the province probably agree that's probably not an appropriate word to use for First Nation constraint. You know what I mean? But there are a lot of, I guess my message is there are a lot of things you have to consider doing layout, just doing the groundwork. You're at the front line of the battlefield, like whatever the fancy planning framework, the agreements you have, you know, the consensus, whatever you have with different parties, it all happens at the ground. And one sad thing about layouts is, I think we see a lot of problem about this is they call it entry-level job, and people come here, they work like a year or two, and then they move on. They go to the office. Even myself, I worked for 2 years, and there's a company trying to poach me and put me in the office, and I'm like, no. But so they always have this constant, like new people in the field doing those kind of work, and then there are always mistakes. You always hear like loggers complaining about, you know, that layout doesn't make sense, you know. I actually got yelled at by a trapper, like outfitter. It's like, oh, a 12-year-old can do this. It's so easy. And I agree to certain degrees, but I get his message is, you know, we need more experienced people, that more people passionate about, you know, other things in forestry to all work together, especially at the you know, the high school student. Please pick forestry. We offer forestry at UNBC, so.
Oh, forestry is the best. I picked it totally randomly. Like I told you, my early experiences of WAS and, you know, and Clayoquot protests and whatnot. But, you know, in the end, I came around to it and I was like, that is an interesting looking degree. Like I don't feel constrained at all by taking this degree. And I've never felt that. I felt like I have an education that can take me anywhere I want. That's exactly how I've used it, right? It doesn't tell you to go one direction or another. You are set up for anything that you want to do next.
Are you the first generation forester?
I am.
You are?
Yeah.
Do you have a hard time explaining to your parents about what are you even doing forestry?
Yeah, I do, because they live in Vancouver, right? And so there's a mindset that can come with that sometimes. My parents have a neighbor that has, you know, save the old growth on the sign on the front lawn kind of thing, right? And I'm like, okay, let's talk about old growth.
Right.
And the value of this to the province. It's not a simple conversation.
No.
So yeah, it is interesting. I'm actually the first in my family to, I think, even finish a university degree.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so.
Congrats.
Yeah.
And now you're the deputy chief forester.
Mom and dad just said, go learn. And I think that's one of the things I love about forestry is you just never stop learning.
You can never stop.
Right?
I have people talk to me in a sense that they just got everything figured out in forestry, and I think they kind of arrogant in a sense that I just don't think you can ever have a possibility to get this figured out. It's so dynamic. It's always changing. Our values change all the time. I like to use this idea of the moral society, the way people care. At this day and age, it's different than probably back in the 80s and probably back in the 50s. So you're always changing, and our forest management have to adapt to those changing values.
Exactly.
And more society dynamic. It's just complicated.
Yeah,
you can't got everything figured out.
Like I think it was at the Forest Professionals Conference. I heard the chief forester Shane Berg saying something I've heard him say a few times, which is that, you know, we are inventing new kinds of and ways of doing forestry right now that like you are going to do in the next 20 years, right? Like they're just getting invented.
Right.
I had the privilege of listening to Lenny Joe, who's the CEO of the First Nations Forestry Council, yesterday in a talk as well. He says a similar message. He'll just say like, we're inventing forestry, new kinds of forestry as we go right now, because we have to. I think there's a lot of pride in that. It's exactly where we want to be. We always say to ourselves as a discipline, as a profession, that we want to be innovative. So I think that's exactly what that is. It freaks me out a little bit as like a regulator and an administrator. I'm like, oh gosh, what are we doing? But other than that, I think it's exactly where we need to be. You got to be creative. And
It's awesome.
yeah.
Okay, move on to the next question.
There's more. Yes.
I think there are two more, and then
Okay.
two or three. I guess I can just, what are your thoughts on the shifting approach to forest disturbance? Let's just stop there.
Yeah. So like mega fires and all those kinds of things, I guess, is maybe what you're asking about.
Yeah.
That's where my mind goes anyway, shifting
is. That's
forest
one of-
disturbance.
Yeah.
I think about, the work that I was involved with in the last couple of years related to that old growth strategic review, which is not about old growth. It's about the fact that we have a changing biological reality on the land base. And we have changing economics, and we have changing societal values, like constantly and rapidly. But I also think that like in BC, we're really used to this, especially as foresters. Like this is what happens. This is what we do. There's always change. It's a different scale and pace right now. So, fires are a great example. Like when we see some of the large fire complexes that we're having today, they have different behavior. They leave a different landscape than we've seen before. And that, like I learned when I went through forest fire level 300 at UBC, it was like, okay, this is what you can expect. This is how you reforest. This is how you rehabilitate. Well, that is not the case anymore. And so we're out there learning from this as fast as we can. Thank goodness we have the right people for that, and we're fortunate for that. But I think, there kind of is an army of people in this discipline to help us with this. Like we need entomologists and pathologists and facilitators and all of these different people to help us kind of address this fast changing disturbance on the land base, not just the biophysical part of it, the disturbances, but all those other pieces that I talked about as well. I think we do have a lot of new partnerships in this realm. So I come back to fire a lot because I really like it. It's really cool to see initiatives starting up, like and I'm out of my depth on this one, but I am aware that we have new initiatives in cultural and prescribed burning happening across the province that they weren't there before.
Cool. Where?
I couldn't tell you exactly where, but our BC
happening.
Wildfire Service has been a leader in this, and they work directly with nations, and so you're starting to see more burning happening in the fall.
That's awesome.
Oh yeah, it's
awesome.
It's really cool. And so that I think is a really great strategy that BC's undertaken to help really replenish the ecosystems in the province, and do it in a way that honors kind of that traditional the traditional knowledge of those areas, and bringing in what we're learning from the science, right? After we see what do you need to do after you have a catastrophic mega fire, so to speak. So,
right.
Yeah, we're starting to see some cool stuff.
Good to hear.
Yeah.
And one last question from this whiteboard. By the way, I want to give people at UNBC a shout out. I keep saying UNBC. I should give UBC a shout out too. I keep wanting to do a podcast with students from UBC and maybe from other institution in the province, and try not to make just a UNBC thing. Even call themselves UNBC Forestry Club Podcast, but we should really unite all the forestry students in the province. And then so other
That's a
people,
great idea.
if you're listening, we should do one together.
Love it.
But I do want to give the students who asked this question a shout out, and thank you for asking those questions. And all right, so last question from the students is where do you see the future of the forest sector going? Another humongous question for you.
I wish I could ask that question back to whoever asked it. I think right now everyone's opinions on this are pretty valid. There's a lot of change, like we've covered here in our conversation, and there's no crystal ball. There's no AI that can predict this and tell us the pathway through it. But I've said a few times, like I really do think this is a very exciting time to be in forestry, and I have to laugh at myself saying that, because I think people have been saying that for 20 years. And it just gets more and more true. I do think the future is really, really bright in this sector. Like we have an incredible land base. There's a world-class resource here. There is world-class biodiversity. There's world-class skills and people here. And we are taking an approach that just hasn't ever been done here before with some of our new initiatives, and particularly the way that we plan. That's something that's very near and dear to me and always has been. So I just think it's the best time to be doing this right now. I'm very optimistic about it. I don't know what bumps in the road are going to come. We definitely have them, right? We know we're facing some challenges, but I see great change in the next little bit. I don't know what it'll look like. I mean, I want to be a part of helping to attract new investment to BC, right? And helping to create new forms of kind of, our land governance system, as we're doing right now through the planning tables, bringing nations in a G2G manner, I think is where we're headed for sure. So yeah, I see no end of possibilities that could happen here, but I think we have the right mix of things to make it successful. We always have. And, we're still here. We're still doing forestry in BC. Yeah. That's not going to change.
Yeah.
I don't see that changing.
There's always a demand for wood. There's always demands. They're saying there's mass timber. Mm-hmm. They emit less carbon compared to concrete and steel. There might be dispute. There might be people have different opinions, but that's okay. That's forestry. It's where different opinions.
It's where they merge. It's where they come together. Absolutely,
and
it is.
I think it's important to embrace those differences and listen to them. Part of the reason we have this podcast is expose students and hopefully more people with different perspectives, and they're pretty diverse sometimes. And I think we should allow to have an environment to have different people with different beliefs and opinions and come up and express themselves. And we have a lot of people comments DM me and then, you gotta challenge those people with this questions and that questions, and then I'm like, our mission is not challenge anybody. Our mission is to listen, right? As a student led projects, I think we need to listen to different voices. You can still think critically, have those
of course you can.
Your own thoughts, but for this platform, I was thinking about it last night. It's more like a opening thing about the going back to the judge court cases. It's more like opening statements for all your thoughts, but I don't want to go into the rebuttal part. But if I'm doing that, and I think it's important to do that in forestry, have this kind of healthy debate. But I want to make sure it's crystal clear for the guests to come up. This is going to be a debate component. We're gonna, But I think for now, we just let everybody, including you, including a lot of other guests that came up and will be coming up, to express their concerns and thoughts about forestry and basically what you do and stuff like that. So
could I turn the tables and ask you a question?
Yeah, of course.
I'm really interested in kind of like right, as before we were kind of going into the podcast, just like I really appreciate this opportunity to kind of connect and find out where you're at, where your cohort is at, of people coming into the profession, into the discipline and into the work. So I'm interested in your view on where you think the sector is going and what you think's happening there.
When you ask me a question, my heart rate just goes up. So now I can relate. When I ask a question, your heart rate, I don't know if your heart rate goes up and down, but like,
probably if we looked at what's going on.
Questions. But so that's the thing. My left brain think differently than my right brain.
Of course.
So they're always debating each other. So right now I'm at a phase that I think I've witnessed myself that importance of forestry to communities, for a lot of First Nation communities, that I think not a whole lot of people understand that. But I've seen people from First Nation owned logging company, First Nation owned licensees, First Nation woodlot license, and it's important for the communities. But I also get the other side of things is the biodiversity side of things, like it's this ecosystem service. I hear them, it's so now I'm just thinking about how can we have a forestry sector while we're still having those biodiversities and other values in mind. And so right now I'm really working on trying to see to diversify our silviculture prescriptions, not everywhere, but because we have those dichotomous kind of binary approach, either clear cut or completely protected, we having the huge gap in the middle, like the different shelter woods and different selection harvest variations of them, and then the implication of those on our land. So I think we have so much tools as foresters. So why don't we start exploring using those? But also, you got to be economic and making sense as well. And
it has to be viable.
Yeah, nobody's going to start a business to lose money.
That's right.
And again, it's a difficult thing. I keep saying that, but right now I think we need to explore how to diversify our silviculture prescriptions. And then when we're doing the fire, fire is a big one, right? I myself got caught in the fire before. In Mackenzie,
yeah,
there were like rank 5 fire on both sides. We're trying to
that sounds like a story.
Evacuate is one way in, one way out.
Yep.
Yeah, I was working in Mackenzie, and then we got an in-reach message coming around 3 o'clock. There's a new fire started on the road. You guys working on? We gotta leave ASAP. So we ran back, jumped in the truck, started driving out, and I see 3 fire columns, one on this side, one on this side, one on the road. So there are 3 new fires started that day, and then it was dry. It was 2023. It was super dry that summer up in Mackenzie, and we're driving out, and then there's a helicopter, actually, the wildland firefighting helicopter was flying with us, and then past us, and then landed in front of us on the road. And then he was like running, really rushing. He said, "Oh yeah, if you guys want to bring your paint on your truck, just keep driving." And I was so confused. What do you mean? And he just ran back and took off. So basically telling us not to drive forward because there's a huge fire. So we're calling people over the radio. Hey, is that portion of the road is it drivable? And this guy got on the radio. Said, "Oh yeah, of course. I just drove past that thing like 10 minutes ago. So okay, what's drivable?" And then it was me. And then three trucks, 5 people. Everybody on that crew other than me was from Vancouver.
Yep.
So this is the first time basic summer students exposed to forestry.
Yep.
And then, so we're just pushing forward. Now you can start seeing the spot fire on both sides. And now you get into like the actual fire. We're just trying to, put the pedal down the metal. Yeah, try to push through. But there's because on a little bit hill, it's a bush road. There's a the couple suspend like blow down in a way that you just can't push with the truck. So I kind of asked my passenger to get down to even cut it, trying to get rid of those blowdowns so we can drive through. We're talking about fire on both sides. As soon as you open up the door, I just feel like this heat wave came in and punched me in the face.
Yeah.
And he was out there for maybe like 10 seconds. His eye was like started swollen, and I'm like, we're not driving past this, so we just turn around. So and then just picture 3 trucks doing like a million turn in the middle of like narrow road, and then we got out of there and they called a helicopter that day.
That is an exciting story.
Anyway, that's a big, how did I even get here? That's a big, big tangent. We're talking about fire management, right? And so you want to protect the communities, and fire management is a big one. And people think about, fire protection, you want to manage all forests, it equals clear cut. No, there are other methods that we can use as forestry community to manage those.
There's so many. We have a huge toolkit for that. Huge toolkit. And so I'm glad you brought up silviculture. I'm fortunate to have a huge team here that is, got a lot of provincial silviculture experts on it. And they tell me about all the things that they're working on. Broadleaf, integrating broadleaves, right? The fire breaks, the fuel breaks that, we can create using different silviculture techniques. We're having success in that already. Yeah, it's pretty cool to see. Some of the community forests have been really active in this space and done work. And then I think we had one in the southern interior of the province that actually got put to the test. They had done a completely new system, and a fire came along, and I can't think of which one it was right now, but it just slowed right down, calmed it right down.
Yeah.
And it was exactly as designed. And so
Perfect.
we have the tools in the toolkit for this, right? It's just about getting them out on the land base. And yes, there's lots of challenges to that. Some of them are financial, some of them are incentive, some of them are more just cultural,
Yeah.
right? We're not used to it. And we need people to learn these approaches too. So I think what you're doing here, this kind of approach is amazing because it brings the questions up. Like we need to talk about these things or we're not going to change anything, right?
We need to talk about this peacefully, civilly, constructively, instead of getting into those blaming games, start demonizing each other, and you have this really inefficient communication.
I find silviculturalists are some of the best at that because they just go right out into the woods and they just hash it out. They have their debates right there and they say, that's not going to work. Let's try this instead. And they're so good at monitoring and following up and learning from what they've done. It's such a good discipline. They're so good at it. So I want to learn from those guys.
Me too. And single tree selection, that's one of my projects I'm working on for school to graduate. Single tree selection using tree marking. They use that system in Algonquin, Ontario.
Yep.
And they're logging in their provincial park.
Yep.
People freak out, why are you logging your provincial park? But they really need to go and visit those harvested sites using single tree selection. I'm trying to make a video out of this just to give the audience, without any forestry education, a visual presentation of those single tree selection harvested forest. It's a cut block, but it looks exactly just like a forest. You still have that complexity, structural, horizontal, vertical. Also have the cavity trees and of course root debris on the ground. It's a stand improvement silviculture prescription, but the downside is the cost. So, but when you're close to town, when you have those really sensitive area, let's say tap, let's say maybe, I'm just thinking about park, if you're trying to stop like Jasper fire from happening again, maybe, I'm not saying I should do this, but maybe we can use single tree selection to trying to do some thinning on the outside of our communities surrounded by parks and other sensitive land designation.
And we're seeing that. We're seeing foresters come forward with those ideas right now and really challenging, like, in areas where we've previously said this is a really important visual shed, for example. You know what? Maybe that's no longer the highest priority. So those are discussions that are happening. Like, they're very live right now. The term that I hear referred to the most is calling it active management.
Yeah.
Right? And so how do we actively manage the land base? Because just kind of putting that fence around it and walking away and saying it'll be good doesn't always work.
Yeah.
So fires don't respect that.
Very, very interesting. Okay, I'm gonna have two more questions. I'm gonna wrap this up. And this is pretty much the question I ask every single guest to come up to the podcast is, if you have all the powers, if Harry Potter shows up and then wave the magic wand, you can change one policy in forestry, what would that be and maybe why?
Yeah. And you're asking someone who's just like, policy is near and dear to their heart. So I can't pick one. But what I will say about that is, there's like a really good reason why every policy exists, right? They're there for some reason. So it's really important, I think, before you dive in and start toying with any of them or making changes, to realize that, at the time that they were created, there was some thoughts. You got to examine that. Say, what were they trying to do? And then the other thing I think you have to be really mindful of is the fact that, again, back to complexity in forestry, there's never just one that you can change that's going to have a clear effect. It's like an ecosystem of policy that we inhabit here. You can't just,
I love that.
right?
I love that.
So like changing one isn't necessarily going to have the effect that you want it to. FLP, we wrote that new legislation several years ago with a vision in mind. And when you launch something like that, you don't know how people will interpret it, how they will build around it, what it will do. So it's really fascinating to watch kind of policy get interpreted, and really it's just about, how do we decide to do things? How do we decide to do things? So super complex times. I couldn't pick one.
That's totally fair. 100%. Any messages for students studying forestry? I was going to say at UNBC, but I want to expand that. Maybe for all the forestry students in the province, maybe even outside of the province, maybe thinking about coming to BC,
Ooh.
you know, like what,
Yes.
how do they prepare themselves for this challenging time and then, you know, arm themselves with all different tools to embrace this very interesting but challenging time in forestry?
It is. I would say to them, great choice. Well done. You picked the right profession. You picked the right discipline. It will not let you down, right? Whatever you decide to, even if you go off to do law after this, or you go to do business, it will have prepared you in some way, shape, or form, and you will be better for it. I think, you know, there's new aspects that I think people going into forestry need to think about more than they have in the past. Like when I was going into forestry in 1999, I didn't think that negotiation was something that I would need to have as a competence. I didn't think that, you know, active listening or like empathy was like on my mind as something that I would need to know how to do in the profession of forestry or the business of forestry. And because we're in this complex time and because we're kind of shedding a lot of the norms and things that we've done in the past and we're moving to new systems, we have to be able to have those tough conversations. Foresters are always in the center of those, right? No matter where you work, whether it's in policy, whether it's in the layout business, right? Wherever you are, you're going to be part of those conversations, and you are going to be relied upon to bring integrity and fact to those conversations as well. So it's a great privilege to be able to do those things, to be able to have that. I have a very service mindset. I'm very much like that. But I think, you know, there's a lot of new aspects to coming into forestry these days for students. And I just think what a great place to be right now. Like you have no shortage of things you can do with this degree. Just work, get experience, right? Whatever that is, get out there and just keep learning. I think that's what this is all about. Yeah.
I absolutely love that. Thank you for that statement. That was great. Yeah, I kind of need to. Is there anything else you would like to add on this episode? Is there anything that you want to address that you didn't get a chance to speak of? Anything you want to get off your chest, or anything you want anything you want to say?
I just want to say thanks to you for this.
I appreciate it.
It's been really cool. It's been a fun conversation. You're a joy to talk to. You ask great questions, and I know there was probably many more that we didn't get to. I love your process. I love how, you know, sitting here with you is also like sitting here with your cohort at UNBC. You went and asked them their questions. So thank you for doing this. It's not easy.
I appreciate you. I appreciate that. And I thank you so much. I know you're extremely busy, and I thank you for even doing this and giving us 2 hours, an hour and a half of your time to,
my pleasure.
to talk to us. I really, really appreciate this. And if there's nothing else, then I will kind of just wrap it up. And so I just want to thank you again for coming. And normally I would thank the C4 radio station. That's where we record majority of our podcast. But today I want to thank, what is this building even called? Ministry of Forest building.
This is the Capitol Park complex.
Oh, Capitol Park?
In Victoria, behind the legislature. Yeah.
Let me just thank the Office of Chief Forester.
There you go.
Okay. Thanks for the Office of Chief Forester for providing this facility for us to record. And so this wraps up this episode of the podcast. Anyways, thank you for tuning in, spending time listening to us chit-chat about forestry, nature, and life at UNBC. And UNBC Forestry Club Podcast is a student-led podcast sponsored by absolutely nobody, but a bunch of students who are passionate about forestry, the outdoors, and adventures. So new episodes hopefully drop weekly. Hopefully. Depends on midterms. So stay tuned for more insightful conversations and inspiring stories. And until next time, let's continue to grow together, rooted in our love for the forest. Have a great week, and we'll see you in the next one. Thank you, Norah. Appreciate this. This is amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.